All right, welcome to Halitics. Don't know if you heard that music coming in. I hope you did, but if you didn't, I'll cut it out tomorrow. Hey, hope you had a great weekend. It's 11 here on the East Coast where I'm broadcasting live in this moment, and I ask you, please do join me. Would love to talk to you. That is one one aspect. As much as I like doing the live streams, getting to show you as well as talk to you, getting to show you what I'm talking about. On video, one thing I do miss is that intimate conversations with you, with my listeners, that I so enjoyed, that I thought were the best aspect of doing live radio, live talk radio for all those years. And I note again that my goal, why I think I'm providing something a little bit different than you get on other live streams, you get on other videos on YouTube and wherever else you may enjoy media, enjoy the personal, the intimate media, not the corporate media, but the independent media that I bring you and that many others do as well, that we have a place to sound each other out, to share our thoughts, to come up with solutions to the extraordinarily thorny problems, the challenges that we face. And some of you may disagree very much. In fact, I know you do with much of what I say. So if you disagree with me, come on board, tell me why I'm wrong. And maybe I'm wrong. And maybe I'll say, hey, I got that wrong. And plenty of times I do. And other times you may say, maybe Ginsburg's got more of a point than I thought he did. And that's, I think, how we get to a better place and to better understanding. Also, because there's a lot of misconceptions I think we have on all sides of the political aisle, that those who don't share our views on a particular issue or a broad spectrum of issues, there must be something wrong with them. They must have, they're corrupt. I was accused of that. Are you getting paid for your Russia propaganda? Somebody accused me, and I'm like, I wish. No, I'm not. I present the views that I believe are right, and I try to back them up with the evidence that undergirds them. Obviously, those who don't share my view rely on other evidence, or don't think my evidence is the evidence I rely on is persuasive, and think their evidence is more persuasive. And one of us is right, one of us is wrong. Let's try to figure it out so we can move forward and hopefully solve some of, again, these really existential threats that we face, whether it's endless war, potential nuclear conflict with Russia, with China, whether it's extraordinary income and wealth inequality that besets in terms of the poverty aspect, right? Because extraordinary wealth, people who have, more cars than they can count, homes in every hemisphere, and when I say every, right, you're saying, well, there's two, right? There's east and there's west. There's also north and south. So, people who have homes in Europe, in the United States, in South America, in Australia, perhaps in Africa. So that's what I'm talking about. People who have that kind of multi-generational wealth that really will never, ever run out as long as tax rates remain at abysmally low rates. And of course, the climate cataclysm that is the cause of, that we have caused, and that is now causing the sixth great extinction. So we have to figure out how to address these problems. We have to come up with solutions, and we need to implement them. And right now, we're not doing very well. I do believe, and one of the ways that many of you probably don't agree, where you don't agree with me, where you don't share my view, is that the woman who is on your screen right now, I guess, I don't know if you're looking how it looks. Maybe it's mirrored on your image, but the way I look at it, she's at my stage left. Okay, she's stage left, so that's Rachel Maddow. She's one of the problems. She's not part of the solution. She is a generator of hyper-partisanship, of intra-class division. That is what Rachel Maddow specializes in. She is pro-war. And similarly, her compadre at this military conference sponsored by military contractors Lockheed Martin and Palantir, is doing the same. and I've said this before about Raskin, he is considered one of the more progressive members of Congress, maybe not as progressive as some of the members of the squad. I don't believe they're on our side. I don't accept the argument that some progressives make that, well, Raskin, like everyone, is flawed, but he's better than the alternatives. I don't buy it. I just don't. I think he is part of the reason we're where we are. I think his hyper-partisanship, his refusal to call out the Democratic Party for all of the bad things it does, makes it more challenging for us to come up with a coalition of poor, struggling, and working people. So I oppose him. I hope someone will challenge him here in my district where I live. He's my Congress member in the 8th Congressional District. Let's get into this. Maddow and Raskin appeared at this conference by Palantir that was sponsored by Lockheed Martin and Palantir. It was a DEI, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion conference. It was about how can we have more diverse, equitable, and inclusive military contractors. So I guess we have more trans people who are, sending drones to kill Russians and to perpetuate endless war. Max Blumenthal, you may have seen that video, and I do thank him and the Gray Zone for bringing this to my attention. But the story actually that I'm relying on does come from The Intercept, which is interesting too, because The Intercept has gotten its criticism from at least some folks as that they pulled their punches, that and there is one of their top investors, I think his name is Pierre Amadou, something like that, is Almidyar, is a billionaire, and there is legitimate criticism to be had against the Intercept. That said, they've done some really good work and brought important matters to our attention. So from the Intercept, just last week. Oh, and yes, Blumenthal was at the event, and he asked that very question: were there trans divers who went down into the Baltic Sea and blew up the Nord Stream pipeline? Which I thought was a pretty good question, because that's this kind of pink washing, or whatever term you want to use, is just so offensive to me that somehow if you put a few folks who are different in terms of identity, that somehow makes all your war crimes, your crimes against humanity, it somehow makes them okay. And you're thieving, your theft from the American public, your theft of lives from people all over the world, and your theft of billions of dollars from the American people. So from the Intercept article, Raskin and Maddow, outspoken critics, that's what they say, of the bloated defense budget and the MAGA wing of the Republican Party. Yet nevertheless, and this article came out at the end of May next month, meaning early June, just last week, Raskin and Maddow will headline. They actually did headline the event. They attended the event sponsored by defense industry giant Lockheed Martin Palantir, $26 billion defense contractor founded and chaired by Peter Thiel. So this is what your progressive media host, your number one, quote, progressive media host, and one of the allegedly top progressive representatives in Congress do with their time. They appear at conferences that you can't attend, that are private, where where Maddow gets, I'm sure, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and Raskin rubs elbows with people who are probably going to give him and I think he doesn't take corporate money, I believe, to his credit, but he'll take the $2,300 that the individuals at that conference are happy to hand him. And those individuals, of course, are military contractors, people who are getting incredibly rich. How rich? We'll talk about that in a second. How much money are they getting? We'll talk about that in a second. That's who your progressive Congress member and your progressive TV host, once a radio host, are doing. And I'm just absolutely disgusted. This is the swamp. This is why we must move away. Gosh, we have to get away from this duopoly where both parties are complicit, where both parties are responsible for doing the absolute wrong thing over and over and over, and without shame, and with ugly BS excuses. Don't let them get away with it. Please. Now look, I wish I had an alternative. The People's Party, remember that? Jimmy Dore championed them. I don't have a problem with that, except that they've never run a candidate. As far as I know, there's never been a candidate who's run as a People's Party candidate. Maybe someone in West Virginia. Maybe next year when Manchin runs for re-election, an election he'll almost certainly lose. Maybe there'll be a People's Party candidate. We do have a Green Party. We have some Green Party candidates who win elections. We got to get behind them, folks. We can't continue this. It's just not acceptable. Now, I love this comment on Twitter. David Swanson, progressive, because it was what I just showed you where from the article. Now, it was a good article that they brought this to our attention and Intercept got a lot wrong. Progressives Raskin and Maddow are outspoken critics of the bloated defense budget. Are you kidding? WTF? Yes, absolutely. That struck me immediately as soon as I read that. Are you kidding me? Who? What? Maddow? I know Raskin has performatively voted against Pentagon budgets. It is true. But he has done so in situations where there was, 400 plus votes in Congress, a enormous coalition of Republicans and Democrats voting together. And people talk about partisanship and bipartisanship. Well, there's always bipartisanship to raise the Pentagon budget. And so Raskin, he's kind of made a name for himself as someone who's critical of the Pentagon and wasteful Pentagon spending. By the way, something also Chuck Grassley has done is criticize wasteful Pentagon spending, as has Rand Paul and his father before that, Ron Paul. So Raskin, yes, gets, I guess, some brownie points for voting against the bloated defense budget in the past. But is he an outspoken critic? I don't see it. I just Googled Raskin defense budget criticism. Couldn't find anything. Couldn't find any public statements. Well, maybe the Intercept article presents those criticisms, right? I mean, they're saying he's an outspoken critic. So I want to find what exactly is being presented as his criticism or what they're relying on for that statement. And you will see that there ain't much there to justify that statement. So let's see if we can, let's get that right there for you. Give you 1 sec. I just don't want to make it too confusing. But the article just doesn't justify that. There's just no justification. And you can see it. It's actually so weak when you look at their actual evidence for the statements that Raskin and Maddow are harsh critics of the defense industry. So Raskin, as recently as 2020, when, by the way, there was a Republican in the White House. Remember, this article came out in May. The most recent criticism that they come up with for Raskin for bloated Pentagon budgets, and Biden has been boosting the Pentagon budget ever since as well. Yes, he got the troops out of Afghanistan following the Trump negotiations, which he gets good, props for. Absolutely, good job. But Raskin hasn't done anything since, as far as the Intercept tells us, as far as I could find on Google, has done nothing since 2020 publicly, except for voting against some of the budgets. Has done nothing public, nothing that would support the claim outspoken or harsh criticism. And in fact, even in 2020, his resolution, it was a resolution. It wasn't a bill. It didn't say, we're cutting the budget. It was a resolution. It's meaningless. It would have had it passed, no real world impact. And it didn't pass. Didn't even make it to the floor for a vote. So Raskin's the one example is extremely weak, that somehow this guy really is against in some meaningful or has taken meaningful action against the murderous. I mean, these Pentagon budgets, it's how we kill people, killing people all around the world. So Raskin's hardly an example of somebody who has supported, in any meaningful way, cuts to the budget of the Pentagon, and has taken the kind of action we need him to take. Now, the argument for Maddow being an outspoken critic is even weaker. She, according to The Intercept, last said anything back in 2011. And I want to get that for you. Don't have that on my slide right now, but I think I'll be able to get you that clip from the Intercept, because it just really was just absurd. I mean, how are they possibly, with a straight face, argue that this person, this woman, who has been touting Russia as like the source of all evil, claiming that it's been in completely undermining our democracy, who never goes after she's constantly having military retirees, intelligence officials all the time on her program. And that somehow, I can't for the life of me. So that's why I thought it was hilarious. Well, ironic, maybe not hilarious, ironic for The Intercept to claim she's some kind of harsh critic or, bashes the Pentagon wherever she gets a chance. So they do provide one piece of supporting data. In 2011 March, 12 plus years ago, she went after defense spending. Wow. Harsh critic, outspoken critic? I don't think so. I think we're talking about somebody who is a lackey, who is a shill for the military-industrial complex. I don't think that somebody who's been on daily, every weekday TV for, has it been, I don't know how many years, 15? Has it been that long? I don't know. I never watch her, never watch her program. But I do know her guests generally include intelligence officers, retirees from the military, and she never has on critics of our perpetual war. So to claim somehow that she's a critic is ridiculous. Now, you could say it actually undermines their point. The point is that these two are hypocrites, right? That Maddow and Raskin are hypocrites. I think Raskin's a bit of a hypocrite to appear at this conference. I don't think you can level that claim against Maddow. She's never, not in many, many years, done or said anything that suggests she has a real problem with the military budget. So I don't, I think that she's just consistent. She's a consistent supporter of empire. That's who Rachel Maddow is. And know that, understand that about her. If you find her to be a credible voice, maybe you should reconsider. And if you have friends who rely on her for their information or relatives, maybe you should be more skeptical of her credibility when you're talking to them. If they're using something she said to justify a certain political view that they take. Well, it's not probably accurate. So Raskin let's get back to Raskin for a moment. Raskin providing his explanation for being at this conference that is sponsored by Lockheed Martin. We'll get to how bad they are in a moment. I think you probably know. His excuse is, I didn't know. I took the invitation because they were giving me an award and honor. How nice. I didn't even know they were sponsoring it until after I accepted the invitation. So here's my response to that. By the way, It continues, Maddow, Palantir, Lockheed, and Truman. This is a Truman conference, and I don't know if that's Harry Truman. I hope it's not Harry Truman, but I guess it's named after him. I don't know. It's kind of a defense group in the government. So those four didn't even respond. Rachel Maddow couldn't even be bothered to explain why she was at this conference to The Intercept. Raskin didn't either. I love that. A source close to Raskin. So it's not even a representative. It's not somebody who Raskin tapped and said, hey, just get them off my back. Give them some explanation, right? That I will, be responsible for, because if you have a representative, then what they say imputed to you. But we can't even be sure that this is Raskin's excuse because he didn't give one. But the source says, well, he didn't know. He accepted it wasn't announced. Well, here's something you can do. I think this is something you can do. When you learn who invited you, where you learn who's funding this event, when you know whose logos are going to be on the screen the whole time that this conference is happening, then maybe you just withdraw. Oh, I didn't know. They didn't tell me. I thought this was going to be, I thought it was Code Pink that was sponsoring it. When I learned it was Lockheed Martin, I was like, nah, I don't really want to go. Yeah, you could do that, Jamie. You could do that. I know you didn't, but you could have done it. So claiming you didn't know who the sponsors were is a pretty piss poor excuse, if it's an excuse at all. It's just basically a load of crap. All right, if you want to, I'd love to talk to you, 240-363-7190. I've had this argument with other Democrats, and they're like, oh, these are the best they can do, and you gotta go along to get along, and you gotta raise money. I don't buy it. This guy is a longtime incumbent. He's very well known in his district. He would strengthen his hand among voters if he were more willing to speak out against the corruption endemic in the Democratic Party. He would strengthen his case if he would speak out against the fascism in the Democratic Party. Fascism, there are a number of different, and this is another, and I want to connect it up, because what we're learning here is how closely embedded corporate America and really multinational, borderless corporations are embedded in the Democratic Party, as well as the Republican. And that is fascism. Now, there are additional definitions. There are other characteristics of a fascist state. So one of the arguments is, well, they're not using violence to take power, the way Trump tried to with his legions in 2021 on January 6th. And, I guess you could say that. I think there's an awful lot of ways the Democratic Party uses, if you don't want to say violence, very anti-democratic means to keep power, such as the security state, the surveillance state, such as punishing people who are willing to challenge them. And we do see that over and over. So I would say that's using force. I would say turning the actual decision-making process of government over to the plutocratic class and corporate America and world corporatism, I would call that fascism. And I think we see that in both parties. I don't think that's that's limited to the Republicans. I think it's clearly not. And since we have a fascistic duopoly in this country, we need to come up with some alternative. All I got is the Green Party. I know some will say, well, support progressive Democrats. Let's take the party over. We need an inside strategy. I mean, this is what I hear over and over. We need an inside strategy. The problem with inside strategy, we've been over it and over it and over it. It doesn't work. It just doesn't. I mean, the insiders become the insiders. The AOCs and the Raskins, the inside strategy creates them as insiders. And so Raskin appears with Lockheed Martin. You know, he pink washes them at this DEI event where the Lockheed Martin, despite some problems with deliveries, they had so many orders that they weren't able to deliver everything that they promised, which reduced their bottom line which is reducing right now their bottom line in Ukraine relating to deliveries. They're still going to generate $1.5 billion in sales linked to Ukraine this year, which is consistent with last year. And they expect that to go up to $6 billion by 2027. So what that means, $6 billion in 2027, is that this war's expected. The projections are now that this war that we're helping perpetuate is going to continue for at least 4 more years. Think about that. That's the conference where Jamie Raskin appeared and took an honor from this company, from this corporation, and another one that got, I don't know, what is it, some enormous amount. Was it 26, the Peter Thiel Corporation? 26 million, I guess. I don't want to overstate it because I did that on one of my other calls. I got the numbers wrong and I was very apologetic, very sorry about that. Now, one argument might be that Raskin spoke truth to power at this conference. And I'd be willing to give that a little bit of credence if we had any speeches provided online, but we don't. I haven't seen anything. I haven't seen any announcements or releases or statements by Jamie Raskin that, I went after them and I really bashed them for their for killing people. Maybe he did. I don't know. It's possible, but it's meaningless. In the end, it's performative. This was an opportunity that was taken advantage of by one of our more allegedly progressive Congress members to raise money from a war criminal, from an organization that is profiting from death and destruction and carnage. That's where we are. That's who our progressives are in Congress. And it's absolutely sickening. All right, 240-363-7190, 240-363-7190. We must find an alternative. All right, let's just talk a little bit. I saw this article in Politico. I wanted to get to it. There's a couple more stories I got for you folks. This was about that dirty debt ceiling deal. And, you hear this, oh, well, it's the Republicans' fault. It's the Republicans' fault. How? I can't. I lose my mind because the more Democrats voted for it than Republicans. And I cannot accept the argument, the excuse, the justification, the rationalization that somehow we had to do it or we were facing some, unbearable, unacceptable, cataclysmic result. The so-called, I don't know what, we wouldn't pay our debts. A default. Oh no, a default. Oh my gosh, how dare we default? How dare we not pay the Treasury bill holders? Basically, the billionaire class. How dare we do that? So here's the excuses, the justifications, which are so pathetic, so weak. Please don't buy them, please. So, divided government. The big ideas of 2021 and 2022 are no longer achievable. Instead, Democrats must protect the legislative achievements they already passed. That is such a load. Protect them. First of all, the legislative achievements were extremely modest to the extent there were any. And they weren't protected. It's just the opposite. They were impaired. They were impacted. They were harmed by this deal. Let's keep the focus where it should be, says Pramila Jayapal, the hostage-taking Republicans. What did Pramila Jayapal get from the Democratic Congress that is now seeing its legislative achievements about to be gutted unless we pass this dirty debt ceiling deal? What is it? Was it Medicare for all? Was it a movement towards Medicare for all? Was it expanded Medicare where people 55 and under can now be covered? 55 and over will now be covered? No. There were some modest tinkering. A few drugs will now be covered. There will be some modest, I believe, negotiations with some drug makers about some drugs. That was basically it. And for her to say, we are voting for working people and poor people, is just absolutely absurd. I can't even begin. You want to vote for them, then here's what you do. You don't, and this goes back to the Hakeem Jeffries vote as minority leader. So this is a corporatist. This is a guy who gets his money from Wall Street. He gets his money from AIPAC, who's not going to cut the Pentagon budget, who is going to cut anything, and whenever he gets an opportunity, any program that negatively impacts on Wall Street profits, that's fair game. So to make that person minority leader and have them the point person for trying to whip up votes in support of this horrible bill, this shows you the cost of the progressives when they go along to get along. And I've heard the argument, well, you had to vote for him because otherwise he wouldn't give you anything. He's going to win anyway. He's not going to give you anything. Well, he's not going to give you anything anyway. When you vote for somebody who takes you for granted, who's dismissive, who had previously campaigned against you or had supported, whose support comes from those who are totally against you, the way AIPAC did everything possible to defeat Summerlee. AIPAC defeated Andy Levin, one of the more progressive Congress members from Michigan. AIPAC narrowly was unable to defeat Ilhan Omar, who has her own issues. When you vote for somebody like Jeffries, you're signaling to them you're weak. You're willing to do anything for them. And it doesn't matter how badly they treat you, how much they ignore, disregard, dismiss your legitimate concerns for working people and poor people. You're doing just the opposite of what you claim to be doing. But it's also a horrible, in this case, this logistics, the specifics, and Politico does a really nice job. And let me slide this up. On the face of it, the bill, and remember what Jayapal said, so I'll leave it up there for you. We're not voting against the president. We're not voting for default. We're voting for working people and poor people. So, are you? A nightmare for progressives. The Nation, a more progressive group, media or outlet, says it's the raw deal. Restricts non-defense spending. Not defense, but non-defense. Greenlights a fossil fuel project that everyone who lives in its path hates. That is another carbon bomb along with Willow Creek that goes through very fragile wetlands. It ends the pause on student loan payments and also will very likely result in very massive interest added to the principal for those loan payments that were paused, because the Supreme Court is very likely to say, no, you've got that interest is in the contract, and you can't, the Congress can't end that, can't change that. And now, with the promise not to pause the student loan payments further, there's nothing that Biden can do about it. It will impose work requirements on some people receiving SNAP benefits. And as Politico points out, thankfully for Biden and congressional leaders, if this is what they want, many on the left could vote no. Right. So basically, your vote no is performative. If you had a strong minority leader who could go to Biden and say, I'm not going to whip this, we can't get this through. You did a crappy job. You did a bad job negotiating with McCarthy. And we're not going to give in to Joe Biden. We get you want that pipeline. We're not going to agree to it. Then Biden would have no choice but to go back and say to McCarthy, no. And who knows, maybe there would be a debt ceiling default. And whose fault would that be? Who would be blamed? Well, I think the Republicans. People don't like this bill. People don't think this is the right thing to do. This isn't making Congress or Democrats in particular more popular. And if you want to know how I know that, why I say that, well, I just look at a guy who supports the bill, who voted yes. Our old friend, Jamie Raskin. Here's what he says. This is the weirdest legislation that anybody has ever been asked to vote on since I got here. Well, it's I don't know, weird. I don't know what that means, but it's nobody supports it. Everyone has problems with parts of it, but the macro alternative is absolutely indigestible. I love that, indigestible? Why is it indigestible to default on payments to people who own treasury bills? I don't get that. Why is that indigestible? What's so indigestible about it? What's the indigestible about not paying Lockheed Martin when the bill comes due for a few months? I'm sorry. I don't get what's indigestible about that. It's perfectly digestible. I can digest it. What's indigestible about coining $1 trillion coin? I don't think it's, I think it's a gimmick. Not following that one is a good answer, but some think it's a really good idea. What's indigestible about that? And saying, well, we've got all that money in the treasury, so we're not deficit spending anymore. We've got it. We're not spending money we don't have. We got $1 trillion in the mint. What's indigestible about that? What's indigestible about packing the Supreme Court with people who are going to uphold your 14th Amendment argument that you don't have to, that any debt ceiling bill, any debt ceiling legislation that requires me to raise the debt ceiling is unconstitutional. What's indigestible about that? I can digest that, Jamie, and you as a constitutional law professor should be able to digest it. All right, these people are not our friends. They're not on our side. They're not on the side of the American people. And frankly, they are fascistic. You want to know why I say that? I mean, you're quite, well, come on, Hal, they're not really violent. Like those horrible MAGA people, the dirty, smelly shaman. Those are the people we have to be afraid of. Yes, well, maybe there's some things we don't like in this bill, but it's better than it's better. We all have to stand together. We all have to stand together. We can't give the Republicans a win. You just gave them a huge win. You gave them a huge win. How about the argument? Well, they're so in disarray. We're all together. The Republicans, they can't even agree on anything. Well, they sure agreed to get over on you Democrats. They sure did. They sure look a hell of a lot stronger than the Democrats look right now, where they cut everything out of the budget except for defense spending. Anything that helps people is being cut. Student loan are going to become active right away, and there's nothing anyone can do about that. This pipeline's going through, come hell or high water. There's nothing anyone can do about that. But Democrats all have to stick together. So here we go back to, did I mention Assange? I don't know if I did. I was talking about The Intercept. So I want to get, so fascism, right? This is fascism. This is where corporations are making policy. Where what benefits the plutocratic class, the corporate class, is what bills are passed. That is fascism. Some of you will say, well, but they're not violent. They're not using threats. They're not using a possible coup to get what they want politically. Well, here's what Ryan Grimm has to say. This is from The Intercept. Is now picking a fight with Australia after offending them by canceling a trip there over the debt ceiling by reopening a case against Julian Assange. So Julian Assange, now I always thought a free press, that a robust media that goes after power, abuses of power, which is exactly what Julian Assange did and exactly why he's being persecuted by our government. He published all sorts of information that demonstrated war crimes by the U.S. military. And also lies, right? That we were doing all sorts of things we said we weren't doing. That's called free press. That's called First Amendment. And Barack Obama really didn't like it. And he really wanted to go after Assange. But ultimately, they decided they weren't going to charge him under the Espionage Act, I believe. Or they did charge him, sorry. They did charge him under, I'm not clear on this one. I got to get it right. And I apologize for that. There was one law they didn't charge him under, and then there was another they did. So I think it was, they claimed he was not a journalist and that he had, that it was a conspiracy to steal government records. That was it. Conspiracy to steal government records, and then later on use the Espionage Act, which makes it a crime to have any. So the argument was he conspired with Manning, Chelsea Manning, and others to steal records, which the New York Times didn't do. They didn't charge him. This Justice Department didn't charge him under the Espionage Act, which makes it a crime to publish government secrets, period. It's not a crime to publish government secrets if you didn't get them illegally. So the New York Times, which basically just reprinted, and the Washington Post, which basically reprinted a lot of what Assange put on WikiLeaks, is not guilty under the theory that underlie the charges against Assange, because Assange isn't being charged under the Espionage Act. He's being charged for theft of documents, which is incredibly weak and should certainly be thrown out. And most people recognize, again, that it should be free speech. I'm going to look up, I think there may also have been charges lately under the Espionage Act, right? So they're trying to use that as well. They just said, we don't care, we'll charge him, we won't charge the New York Times. Australia says, look, Assange told the truth. Assange, there's no doubt that his information was reliable. There's no real evidence, despite the massive claims to the contrary, that he somehow endangered lives. So stop it. Just stop it. Let him go. You've already destroyed his life. But Joe Biden is using the government, the power of government, force. That's fascism. To suppress free speech, to punish somebody who told the truth. That is fascism, folks. That's where we live right now. Now, it's not, I won't get, I hope, thrown in a concentration camp for talking about this. The penalties aren't nearly the same as in countries that have even fewer freedoms or less freedoms. But This government is using force to suppress freedom in our country. It is never come to terms with the torture that was practiced under the W administration. For all we know, we are still doing that. This duopoly is not. We are not living in a truly free society. And even if we had the social justice rights, such as publishing, without fear of any reprisals, without fear of being prosecuted, even if we did have that, we don't have economic justice. You're not free if you're sleeping under a bridge and you have no alternative to sleep anywhere else. You're not. And that's where we are right now. That's where we are in this country. So, for many, it's not, I just, so disheartening, so challenging to get people to get this. And also, what's the solution? Now, I've said we've got to move away from the duopoly for sure. But I've had people say to me, but that's not going to work either. What success have we had? And by the way, here's your Sydney Morning Herald showing how Assange is still subject to prosecution. This is, and I think you can see it. I'm going to blow it up for you a little bit. This is Dateline, June 1. This is not some kind of old story. We'll zoom in on there. Dateline, June 1, 2023. There you can see it. June 1, 2023. And here is just down below that fold there. So I'm always open for discussion, how we can come up with solutions. Mine is we've got to move, we've got to embrace immediately alternatives to the duopoly. All right, one more point. Again, if you're not convinced yet we're living in, if not true fascism, proto-fascism, look at who we're supporting in Ukraine, in the Ukraine war. Look at how we're, again, and this is all this award for the profit of Wall Street corporations, of arms manufacturers, and permanent war. What was it, $7 billion they're looking at? Some enormous profits down the road with the war continuing until at least 2027, if not longer than that. So this is who we're supporting. And I don't want this to say, okay, well, this is the end of it. But I think it's really important. And I think it's really important the way the New York Times does everything possible to try to minimize this. Nazi symbols on Ukraine. We've heard this, right? That the Ukrainian army is a haven for neo-Nazis, paramilitary, right-wing groups. We've heard this. Not a lot, but some. And here the New York Times, to its credit, is reporting on this story, although its analysis is just so tendentious. Troops' use of patches bearing Nazi emblems risks fueling Russian propaganda and spreading imagery that the West has spent half a century trying to eliminate. Maybe it's not the risk of Russian propaganda we should be worrying about. Maybe it's the risk that we're backing a bad horse, that we're supporting bad people, that it is not clear cut that there's bad, people with black hats and people with white hats fighting in this war, that the Ukrainian military and Ukraine is this wonderful symbol of freedom and democracy, and Russia is evil, and they're often called fascistic now, and it's not unfair. They don't have freedom of speech or press there, even less probably than here. Although they spend a lot less also on their military than we spend on ours, despite being at war. And they do have universal single-payer health coverage in Russia. But I'm not going to sit here and defend Russia. That's not a free country. But to argue, as some have, that right and wrong are absolutely clear cut, well, that's BS, as is obvious by the fact that you do have neo-Nazis fighting on the side of Ukraine. Maybe this isn't such a great idea. Maybe turning Ukraine into rubble isn't really the best thing for Ukraine, especially if their soldiers include neo-Nazis, right? Maybe we should reconsider just what a good idea this is, right? That turning a modern country, that doing this to it with our weapons and giving them ever more weapons, many of which are getting lost or getting stolen by the Russians, maybe, or we don't even know. Maybe this isn't really in the best interests of the Ukrainian people. And maybe those neo-Nazi troops aren't really people that care a heck of a lot about the freedom of the Ukrainian people or want their country to be a better place for all. Maybe that's not really what's going on. Is it possible? Maybe. Just maybe. And if that is a legitimate concern, then let's look very, very closely at it, shall we? Before we continue, without any doubt, without any questioning, supplying Ukraine with ever more sophisticated weaponry, and also bashing, smashing, attacking anyone who says, no, we need to fight. We need to fight for peace. We need to be negotiating. We need to be pushing Russia and Ukraine to stop the killing. Now, I want to just get into this a little bit more because I think it's actually pretty a pretty interesting argument, right? It's that it's not clear to me, right, that that this is dispositive. I don't think we should be in Ukraine. I don't think it's in our interests. I think it's on the other side of the world. I think it's very clear that there are, competing interests that militate strongly against our spending billions of our scarce resources on ever longer death, ever more death and destruction. I don't trust the people who support it. I don't think they've demonstrated that they are good faith actors in any way. So for all those reasons, I oppose this war. But I don't think the fact, that because there are people with neo-Nazi regalia fighting in the Ukrainian army means for absolute certainty that we should, completely, I don't know what the right word is, throw them out with the bathwater because there are some people with neo-Nazi symbols. They do have a Jewish president, for whatever that's worth, or something, I suppose. Means something. So I do buy that. And also because the history of Ukraine is so fraught with Russia. It's so tight. It's, with oppression, persecution by Russia. And when, understandably, to a degree, certainly, the Russian army was pushed back, the Red Army was pushed back by Nazis in 1941 in Ukraine, many Ukrainians greeted them with flowers. Now, were they Jew haters? Yeah, many were. Ukraine is a notoriously anti-Semitic country in the past. But Stalin was also murdering Ukrainians. Stalin was oppressive. Stalin was a tyrant, a dictator, a murderer. So they were caught between two of the worst people who ever lived. And it's understandable to me that some would turn towards Hitler, just as it's understandable to me that some on the right or not even on the right, working poor and struggling people side with Trump because the alternative ain't very good either. But you have to understand also that the Ukrainians did massacre Poles, that they did help many Ukrainian troops in World War II, helped the Holocaust, the killers, at Babi Yar. So we have to be extraordinarily careful before we embrace these people and say, okay, we should be on their side, or they're on our side, or something of that nature. It just doesn't. It just isn't. It isn't, consistent with the complexity of the war right now, of the situation. And given it is clearly complex, we shouldn't be fomenting more and more death and destruction between two groups of people, two armies that are problematic in many ways. We just shouldn't be part of that. 240-363-7190. Just about at the end of the program. Hope you found it interesting. Please like, please share, please subscribe. We got to blow this sucker up. I love doing this. I was thinking to myself, I really like it. I was looking forward to doing my program today. A lot of good topics, I think. But if a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it, yes, it made a sound, but who cares? So I can do these live streams. I think that I'm providing something that you don't get elsewhere. But if you're not listening and you're not sharing and you're not, and we're not getting more and more viewers, have a great afternoon. If you're on the East Coast and if you're on the West, enjoy the rest of your morning. If you're watching me live, if not, whatever time it is, I hope it's the right time for you.